Hello everybody, it's a great pleasure to be here today at the launch of the Institute of Integrated Care. And again, it gives me great pleasure to be able to talk about some of the research I've been doing at this launch event. Now, the presentation that I'll be focusing on is the work that we've been doing on the Birth Satisfaction Scale Revised, an instrument that I developed with Professor Colin R Martin in relation to birth experience. And I really want to talk about why we developed the instrument, how the instrument's used, and where it sits within integrated care. And moreover, the qualities of the instrument which have really facilitated its use internationally and indeed globally. So what is the Birth Satisfaction Scale Revised? It's a 10-item instrument, self-report instrument of birth experience. And there's been many instruments that have been used to assess birth experience over the years. But importantly, many of them have a number of limitations, which might be they're quite lengthy, or they don't have particularly good measurement qualities, or they're not actually rooted in any kind of theoretical or thematic content. So in an attempt to address this issue, we actually developed an instrument that was actually rooted in a theoretical context of childbirth experience, but importantly is also psychometrically robust, so actually has very good measurement qualities, but at the same time is short and easily administered and acceptable to women. And I'll be talking a little bit more about this in a moment, but a recent systematic review has looked at a whole range of birth experience measures highlighted these very sound and important qualities of the Birth Satisfaction Scale Revised, and some really interesting characteristics as well. For example, has the most valid recall over a period of time of any birth experience measure that's been assessed. So up to 5 years, valid and reliable recall. And for those of us who use instruments that are based on recall of a particular event, a retrospective event, that will appreciate that that's actually a very good measurement characteristic to have, valid and reliable recall. So what does it measure specifically? Well, the Birth Satisfaction Scale Revised is a multidimensional measure, so it measures 3 particular substrates of stress experience during childbirth, women's attributes, which again is more of a psychological or personality-rooted feature, and the quality of care received. And the Birth Satisfaction Scale Revised can be scored in a number of ways. Quite often it's used as a single score, and it can be used validly in that context. So a sum score of overall birth experience, but also the subscale scores of stress experience, women's attributes, and quality of care can also be used in a valid and reliable manner. Just want to show you as well a sample of studies just to highlight the diversity of where the Birth Satisfaction Scale Revised has been used clinically and in terms of applied clinical research. So an Australian study, which was looking at different partograph designs, used the BSS-R within the context of a randomized control trial, a small pilot RCT. It's also been used in the National Maternity Survey in the UK, and this paper that was published from the National Maternity Survey, and the most recent National Maternity Survey as well has used the BSS-R to find some really interesting findings related to birth experience and how that correlates with a number of different dimensions that are relevant to birth outcomes. A study in the Middle East, again as an example, used the BSS-R to assess the impact of using ice packs in order to try and, as an intervention in terms of pain control and ameliorating pain control. And again, as an example of a very large RCT that's being undertaken looking at episiotomies in terms of vacuum-assisted delivery in non-porous women, that's been sponsored by the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. So just to illustrate the diversity of studies where the instrument is used in terms of assessing outcomes. So when I talk about the instrument within the context of integrated care, it's important to reflect on where that relates to its use within an overall strategy for assessing birth outcomes. Now, the International Confederation of Health Outcome Measurement published a few years ago the Pregnancy and Childbirth Standard Set, which were the recommended outcomes to be used as assessed by experts across the field internationally and women themselves to assess birth outcomes. That includes all the usual clinical parameters we would be interested in, for example, morbidity, mortality, both neonatal and maternal, but also a range of other factors which are particularly relevant to the woman and the neonate as well. So this includes, for example, quality of life, postpartum depression, and birth experience. And the BSS-R is a recommended measure for birth experiences integrated within that standard set. And again, for those who are particularly interested, here's a research paper which talks about the methods used, which are very evidence-based, for the selection of the measures which are integrated into the pregnancy and childbirth standard ICOM standard set. So I'll talk about the BSS-R in terms of its very good measurement properties. And again, one of these factors which does resonate very strongly with the ICOM guidelines is the validity and reliability of the tool. So in actual fact, the BSS-R has been validated. Here's some examples of some psychometric papers which have been published where it's been translated and validated. For example, so validations in English-speaking countries, for example, the United States and Australia, but also translations in terms of Greece, Turkey, Spain, Hebrew, Italy, Iran, Pakistan, for example. One of the quite striking aspects of the BSS-R is even where it's translated into a language which is very unlike English, say, for example, even grammatically, if we're looking at a language which might be more logographic, for example, we find that it still has really robust psychometric properties. And again, within the context of the ICOM guidelines, this is particularly important when we want to compare birth experience internationally, as well as within a population. For example, if we're interested in groups who've, for example, had an intervention delivery compared to a non-intervention delivery. So what this gives us is a really high degree of confidence that the findings between countries or between groups represent very real differences because we're confident in the measurement characteristics of the tool itself. Where is the tool used? And again, since the ICOM recommendations, and as I think I mentioned earlier, the BSS-R is a fairly recent tool. We only developed this in 2014, and there's a huge number of publications on the tool already, and as I mentioned, it's used in the National Maternity Survey in the UK. But 48 countries are using the BSS-R that we're aware of across 184 sites, and we get requests to use the tool on almost a daily basis. For more information about the measure and for requests to use the tool, which is free to use, but permission is required, we have a dedicated website. So there we are, www.bss-r.co.uk, which provides all the contact details for Professor Colin R Martin and myself, and details about the tool and how to go about getting requests for permission to use in terms of the instrument. So I hope that's been of interest. And again, very excited to be able to present the work we're doing on the BSS-R in the context of the Institute of Integrated Care launch today. So thank you very much indeed for listening, and I hope that's been interesting. Goodbye.